Good morning today. Good morning today is Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, and it's still Adar Aleph. It's the 30th day. Tomorrow's the first day of the second month, but it's Rosh Chodesh. It's Sunday. It's a new week, March 10th, and I'm going to give you a 10-second overview of the long chapter 33, which we did on Shabbos, as we get back into the joy. Good timing, right? Chodesh Adar in the second month. So we're talking about celebrating joyously God's unity. A lot of times, one of the things we said about being joyous is if you're stuck and you're bogged down by something and you're disturbed by something. So one of the better ways, or maybe the best way to get out of it, is by helping somebody else. So how about this? You help Hashem by doing a mitzvah. When you think about Hashem and you think about how God created the whole world to give you an opportunity to connect with Him through so many different wonderful ways, and you can enjoy it at the same time, it's certainly one of the ways that we utilize to get back into the joy mode. So the takeaway from yesterday was a reflection to bring on joy in your divine service. Rejoice in God's joy. Despite His transcendence, obviously Hashem is above us. It's hard to understand that point, but remember this: Hashem is excited every time you perform a mitzvah, and every time you serve Him, participate in His happiness. Okay, now, just adjust this out a little bit. Okay, we're good? Yoda, we're good? Now, today, thank you. The appropriate channel of expression, after having arrived at the above-mentioned oneness consciousness, meaning thinking about the unity of Hashem, is the study of Torah. We're going to explain how Torah is going to bring us great joy. Let's get into that. In today's lesson, at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people were not spiritually capable of absorbing God's presence and His dwelling within them, with the exception of a select few, and therefore Hashem commanded that a Mishkan be built where this would be possible to experience Hashem here in this world. We're on page 46 in the Chayinu, guys. It's known that the chariots are truly the divine, the patriarchs are truly the divine chariots. Shekol Yimehem, what's a chariot? We explained this already. That a chariot follows the driver. There's no will or mind of its own. So Shekol Yimehem Lo'olam Loi Hifsiku Afilu Sha'achas Milikasher Daitam Linishmasam Liriboino Ilamim. Throughout their lives, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they didn't cease even for a moment of binding their mind and soul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Master of the universe. With the aforementioned absolute surrender to Hashem's unity. Meaning their constant awareness of Hashem's unity led them to be continuously in a state of self-nullification, complete bittul before Hashem, as explained fully in chapter 23. We could back up and look it up. So we already are familiar with this term, chariot to Hashem. And after them, Kol Anavim, all the prophets, and each according to the level of his soul and understanding. Madregas Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom hi ha'oila al kulanam. The level and the rank that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to reach, that was like the highest possible level. Shamru alav, as was said about him, Shechina medaberes mitei chireina shel Moshe. God actually spoke through Moshe's throat. So Moshe was such a total and complete surrender to God that the very words he uttered was actually divine speech. God utilized Moshe's physical body to speak to the Jewish people. The relation of Moshe's throat to divine speech was that of one's throat to his own speech. At Har Sinai, the Yidden were privileged to experience a glimmer of this level of self-nullification. But at the same time, they couldn't endure it. It was so powerful that they expired. As our sages have taught us, shall call dibur parcha nishmasan. At every divine utterance, their souls took flight. It's commonly referred to like they fainted, but actually they died, and Hashem just gave them back life. It's not that difficult for Hashem to, He gives us life every day. He woke them up again. God resurrected them. Doesn't mean fainted. That means resurrection. They were out. Shall call diva parkerish masan shehu inyan bitov mitzios haniskalel. That means they didn't exist, and if they didn't exist, they weren't alive. Their souls soared up to heaven, to Hashem. Therefore, since they weren't able to withstand that, and they weren't able to consistently hold on to this complete self-surrender before Hashem, He commanded them to build Kodesh Kedoshim, a holy sanctuary, in order to house His presence, the Shechina, where His presence would dwell, meaning where His unity would be revealed, as we'll explain a little bit further on. So that's it for today. The takeaway is when experiencing heightened levels of divine consciousness, it's imperative to channel that into making the world itself a home for God. I want to just quickly say something before we finish, which we're about to conclude, is that last night I was listening to a podcast of a very dear friend of mine. It was the Meaningful People podcast, and they hosted Rabbi Chaim and Rebbetzin Danziger from Rostov, Russia. Chaim is an old buddy of mine. Fascinating story that how he and his wife, picked up and moved. They had a 2-year shlichus in California, and they decided that they were needed elsewhere. His passion, he already spoke the language, and he was in Ukraine and Russia. Anyway, long story short, they're there for now, I guess, about 15 years, and they were doing a winter camp for the first time, and they picked a place in Rostov. It's southern Russia. It's actually right on the border of Ukraine. So of all places that feels the war, they probably feel it the most. Their airport was shut down, and it has been taken over by the military. They have to go a 6-hour drive to get to the next airport. Anyway, long story short, they go a 10-hour journey from Rostov to go to this beautiful mountain area where there was going to be a lot of snow, and they were going to do sledding and skiing and everything else. They get to the resort where they rented for 150 kids, and there was no snow. They were like disappointed. For a minute, it was disappointed, but the Reb Chaim was saying that every Yid has to realize that Hashem sent you to a specific place for a very particular purpose. The fact that you're born means that the world cannot exist without you, and you are here, and look around, because you have to fulfill your personal divine mission. No one else can fulfill your mission. The kids said they okay, we're going to make the best of it, whatever. It's still going to be winter camp, but they weren't going to have the winter activities as they were expecting, whatever. And it was Shabbos, and actually it was in a very Muslim part of Russia where there are places, that there's a very strong Muslim presence. And it turns out this old 70-year-old guy comes and tells the rabbi, "Come, I want you to come with me. There's a place on the other side of the hill, one of these mountains, that there's a big area where a bunch of Jewish orphans were murdered during the war. And since they were murdered, no Jew has ever come to do any special prayers. And there's no Jew, they haven't seen Jews in this region for forever, for a long time." So Rabbi Danziger was a little skeptical about this, like Muslim guy is going to take him across the mountain somewhere. He had his doubts. But anyway, he Googled after Shabbos. This was on Shabbos. After Shabbos, he Googled, and he came up with, he put in the location, and came up a story on Yad Vashem that there were numerous Jewish orphans that were brought to this area, and the Muslims took in a bunch of these kids and tried to adopt them. Each family would adopt one Jew. They wanted to take them, and they changed their names, and they tried to assimilate them, that they should become part of their families. And the Nazis came, they overheard, somehow rumor got out that there were some Jewish kids in the area, in the town, in the village, whatever it was. And they came in and they rounded them all up, and they brought them across the hilltop, across the mountain. And unfortunately, they murdered them all in that spot. So he's reading this late Motzei Shabbos. It's the summertime, so it ended very late. was like midnight. He decided, and they were leaving the next day. He decided he's gonna call the guy, even though it was really, really late at night. It was like midnight. Calls the guy answered the phone. He says, "Okay, I'll go with you tomorrow." It's just 7 o'clock in the morning. The guy was there, and they decided to go with a few guys. And he said it was only a walking distance away from where they were, during the summer, during the winter camp. So he goes with him, and sure enough, they come and they see some kind of a makeshift graveyard or whatever was there. And sure enough, there was a piece of metal, and it was handwritten, Star of David, and it mentioned, I don't know if it was some names or just that the Jewish orphans that were murdered there. He was so shaken and so touched deep inside his heart and soul that he realized that even though there was no snow and they were disappointed, and it was 10 hours drive away from Rostov, and this was the first time they'd ever done it, and it was all a Muslim area, no Jews around the region, no Jews in the area. He went back and he brought all the kids. They canceled the buses. They pushed it off later to the afternoon, the 10-hour trip back. And all the kids went over there. And he gave a little talk about how, we're here and we're going to say Kaddish. There was somebody, one of the mashgiach that was there with the camp, with making the food, was saying Kaddish. He was a novel at the time, I guess. And he says the Russian kids in general are very, very emotional. They know they've missed out of having the Yiddish lifestyle that, many people around the world do have. It's obviously they're coming back. And many of these kids, Chaim mentioned that many of the kids come from rural cities and villages, not necessarily from Rostov. So every summer, they have buses that go around and pick up these kids for like whether it's a month or two, whatever the summer camp is, but then they don't get to see them for another 12 months. And the kids cry bitterly on the last day. Not like we cry because camp's over and we're going to miss camp. But that's their only Yiddishkeit that they have all year. So he always tells them, he always tried to make them happy by saying, oh, we're going to make a winter camp. And it never really panned out until this past winter. And especially with the war and everything else that's going on, he felt that the kids really needed it. He felt Hashem sent them all there specifically for that mission to say Kaddish for these holy neshamas, these souls, in the middle of nowhere that, Nebuch, they were murdered. And this old Muslim guy knew exactly where they were, and he felt it was important to bring. This was the first time a rabbi or any, religious Jewish person had been there in his lifetime. So B'kitzur, wherever we are, imagine if you had the opportunity. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe you'll cry out of, like Nebuch, the situation, but it brings you, and it should bring us great joy to be able to fulfill a mitzvah. And every single Jew is a shliach from Hashem. And when you're not worried about what do I need? Oh, I need to eat breakfast. I'm a little tired. I woke up an hour earlier. Whatever it might be, kvetching about our little issues, and we're worried about either somebody else or what Hashem needs, that should bring us to tremendous joy. On that note, Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni should be infused with tremendous joy, simcha v'tuv levav, joy and gladness of heart. Ad b'yaskoil, until the moment that Mashiach will tell us Golus is over, then we'll really kick it up an extra notch or two. Sei gesund, everyone. Love you all, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good Chodesh and a Gooteh Voch.